Captain Olivia Chun studied the topographical map spread across the briefing table at Forward Operating Base Whiskey, her eyes tracing the ridgeline that would become her home for the next 18 hours. The valley below stretched 3 kilometers wide, carved between mountains that rose like broken teeth against the pre-dawn darkness outside the operations tent. Major Patterson tapped the map with his index finger. Intelligence indicates the compound here. 2 clicks into the valley. SEAL Team 7 will insert at 0500, clear the target, and extract before the sun gets too high. Your job is simple, Captain. You establish overwatch from this ridgeline, provide eyes on their movement, and call out anything that doesn't match our intel. Chun calculated distances instinctively, the way other people calculated tips at restaurants. The ridgeline position sat 2,147 meters from the target compound, well within effective range for her M110 SAS. She nodded once, committing the terrain features to memory. In the adjacent prep area, Lieutenant Marcus Reeves addressed his SEAL team with the easy confidence of a man who had run these missions 24 times. Chun heard his voice carry through the canvas wall, sharp with the particular authority of special operations officers who measured their worth in successful extractions. His words reached her clearly when he mentioned her call sign. Our babysitter on the hill will be Longshot 6. She'll watch and report. We do the actual work. The 3 junior SEALs chuckled, the sound brief and dismissive. Chun felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, the same sensation she had experienced 17 times across 4 deployments. She focused instead on checking her equipment, running through the mental checklist that had kept her alive through 3 tours. Patterson caught her expression and lowered his voice. Reeves runs a tight team. They've had success together. Just do your job, and it'll be fine. Chun shouldered her pack, the M110 case solid against her spine. She always did her job. That was rarely the problem. The helicopter insertion went smooth, the Black Hawk dropping her at the ridgeline position while darkness still held. Chun moved 40 meters from the landing zone before the aircraft lifted, its rotors fading as she established her hide among the rocks. The M110 came together in her hands with practiced efficiency, each component clicking into place while she used her night vision to scan the valley below. By 0430, her position was complete. Ghillie knitting broke up her silhouette. The spotting scope sat mounted beside her rifle, and 3 magazines of 7.62 NATO rounds lay arranged within easy reach. She keyed her radio once, the click confirming her communication link with the SEAL team. Longshot 6, Havoc actual. Radio check, Reeves transmitted. Good copy, Havoc. Position established, eyes on valley. The sky lightened gradually, gray bleeding into the darkness until Chun could distinguish individual rocks on the valley floor without her night vision. Through her spotting scope, she watched the SEAL team's insertion helicopter appear as a dark speck against the mountains, dropping fast into the valley's northern end. 7 figures emerged and moved in a tight formation toward the target compound. Chun tracked their progress, her scope revealing details the team could not see from ground level. The compound sat quiet, no visible movement. But the buildings to the east, the ones intelligence had marked as abandoned, showed signs of recent occupation. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt. A doorway that had been blocked with debris in the satellite imagery now stood clear. Chun keyed her radio. Havoc actual, Longshot. I have possible activity in structures east of your position, approximately 400 meters. Multiple buildings showing signs of recent use. The radio crackled. Longshot Havoc. Intel shows those structures abandoned. Probably locals. Maintain radio discipline unless you have confirmed hostile contact. Chun watched through her scope as the SEAL team continued their approach, moving past the eastern buildings without changing formation. Through her optic, she saw a shadow shift behind a second-story window, there and gone before she could confirm it. Have you ever tried to warn someone about danger they refuse to see? She thought of her previous deployments, the pattern of dismissal that seemed to follow her from one unit to another. Drop your state in the comments if you know what that feeling is like, that moment when you see the threat but nobody will listen. The SEAL team reached the compound's outer wall. Chun settled deeper into her position, controlling her breathing as she had been taught, watching the eastern buildings through her scope. The shadow appeared again, and this time she counted 3 separate figures moving behind windows. She reached for her radio, then hesitated. Reeves had ordered radio discipline. He had dismissed her warning as civilians. Chun kept watching, her finger resting along the M110's trigger guard. The SEAL team began their breach procedures, stacking up at the compound's main entrance. The sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. In the eastern buildings, more shadows moved. Chun counted positions, calculated ranges, and waited for the moment she knew was coming. The compound door exploded inward under the breaching charge, the sound rolling across the valley like distant thunder. Chun watched through her scope as the SEAL team flowed through the entrance with practiced precision, each man covering his sector. 30 seconds passed. 1 minute. The radio stayed silent, except for brief tactical calls she could barely hear. Then the valley erupted. Muzzle flashes blossomed from 7 different positions simultaneously. The eastern buildings Chun had warned about vomited automatic weapons fire, the sound reaching her position 3 seconds after she saw the flashes. Rock outcroppings she had dismissed as natural features came alive with hidden shooters. A rooftop across from the compound sprouted 2 more firing positions. The SEAL team had walked into a kill box. Chun's scope found Reeves first, pressed against the compound's outer wall with rounds chipping stone inches from his head. 2 of his men lay in the courtyard, one dragging himself toward cover while the other remained motionless. The remaining 5 SEALs returned fire, but they were pinned from 3 sides with minimal protection. Havoc actual to any station. We are taking heavy contact from multiple positions. Request immediate air support. Reeves' voice came tight and controlled despite the chaos Chun could see through her optic. The response crackled back from base operations. Havoc Whiskey TOC. Weather conditions prevent rotary wing support. Earliest possible air asset is 4-5 mics. 45 minutes. Chun watched another SEAL take a round through his shoulder, spinning him against the wall. The man's name was Torres, she remembered from the briefing. He kept firing with his offhand while his right arm hung useless. Reef tried again. Whiskey TOC, we have 2 urgent surgical, need immediate extract. Cannot hold this position for 4-5 mics. Understood, Havoc. Ground QRF is rolling, but 40 mics out. You need to break contact and move to alternate position hotel. Chun counted the enemy positions again through her scope. 9 confirmed shooters, probably more she could not see from her angle. The SEALs were surrounded on 3 sides with open ground behind them. Breaking contact meant crossing 100 meters of killing field. She keyed her radio. Havoc actual, long shot 6. I can engage targets from my position. Multiple hostiles identified with clear fields of fire. The radio stayed silent for 3 seconds. Then Reeves responded, his voice sharp. Long shot. Maintain your position and observe. We need intelligence on enemy strength and positions, not wild shots. Call out what you see. Chen's jaw tightened. Through her scope, she watched 3 enemy fighters moving through the rocks on the northern flank. They carried RPGs, moving into position to finish the surrounded team. She ranged the distance. 1,847 meters. Wind from the east at 6 knots. Temperature rising as the sun climbed higher. Havoc long shot. I have 3 hostiles with RPGs moving to flank your north position. They will have clear shots on your location in approximately 90 seconds. Copy long shot. Maintain observation. The dismissal in Reeves' voice carried even through the radio static. Chun watched the RPG team reach their firing position. The lead fighter knelt, settling the launcher against his shoulder. She could see him sighting through the weapon, his finger moving toward the trigger. The launcher pointed directly at the wall, where Torres crouched with his wounded arm. 60 seconds remained in her estimate. Torres had maybe 2 minutes to live. The other wounded SEAL had stopped moving in the courtyard, and Chun could not tell if he was dead or unconscious. Reeves and his 4 remaining able-bodied men maintained suppressing fire, but the volume of incoming rounds forced them to keep their heads down. The eastern buildings erupted with fresh firing, tracers arcing across the valley floor. One of the SEALs cried out, clutching his leg. 3 wounded now. Reeves screamed into his radio for air support again, receiving the same response. 38 minutes until helicopters could launch. Chen made her decision. She settled the M110's reticle on the RPG gunner's center mass, accounting for distance, wind, and the slight uphill angle of her shot. Her breathing slowed to the pattern drilled into her through 10,000 hours of training. The world narrowed to the scope's view, the crosshairs, and the target. Target acquired, she whispered to herself. The rifle punched her shoulder. Through the scope, Chen watched the RPG gunner collapse backward, the launcher falling unfired from his hands. His 2 companions froze for 1 crucial second, searching for the shooter. Chen's second round took the man on the left. Her third dropped the man on the right before he could run. The radio exploded with Reeves' voice. Who fired? God damn it, who fired those shots? Chen worked her bolt, chambering a fresh round. Long shot 6. Threat neutralized, northern flank. 3 hostiles with RPGs eliminated. She did not wait for his response. Her scope swept to the eastern buildings where the heaviest fire originated. A shooter leaned from a second-story window, his AK-47 sending sustained bursts at the pinned SEALs. Range 1,912 meters. Chun adjusted her aim, accounting for the slight difference in distance and elevation. The rifle cracked again. The shooter in a window jerked and fell from view. Chun shifted to the next target, a man firing from behind a low wall. Another shot, another collapse. She worked methodically, her training overriding the protocol violations she was committing with each trigger pull. In the valley below, Reeves and his team used the sudden reduction in incoming fire to reposition. Torres dragged the wounded SEAL from the courtyard while another team member provided covering fire. They consolidated behind a more defensible section of wall. Their tactical situation improved but still desperate. Chen's scope found 2 more targets in the rocks, both suppressing the SEALs with automatic fire. She engaged them rapidly, the M110 bucking twice in quick succession. Both shooters went down. Her radio crackled. Long shot havoc. The anger had left Reeves' voice, replaced by tactical focus. I have hostile position in building east of compound, 2nd floor, center window. Can you engage? Chen had already acquired the target. On scope, she fired. Stand by. 1 down. Through her optic, she saw Reeves give hand signals to his team. They moved in coordinated bounds, using the breathing room Chen had created to improve their defensive position. The volume of enemy fire had decreased noticeably, the remaining shooters more cautious about exposing themselves. Long shot havoc. I count 7 enemy positions still active. Can you engage from your location? Chen scanned the battlefield through her scope, identifying targets. Affirm. Multiple targets identified. She had fired 11 rounds. 14 remained in her basic load. Then she saw them. 2 pickup trucks racing down the valley from the south, dust plumes marking their approach. Each truck bed held 6 fighters armed with rifles and machine guns. Reinforcements coming fast. Havoc long shot. Be advised, 2 vehicles approaching from south with multiple hostiles. I count 12 additional fighters, approximately 4 mics from your position. Reeves' response came immediate. Can you engage the vehicles? Chun ranged the lead truck. 2,100 meters and closing rapidly. Moving target, uneven terrain, multiple variables. She had trained for shots like this, but the difficulty level had just multiplied. Affirm, engaging now. Chun led the target, accounting for the truck's speed and the projectile's flight time. Her first shot missed, striking dirt 5 meters ahead of the vehicle. She adjusted, fired again. The lead truck's windshield shattered. The vehicle swerved violently, rolling twice before coming to rest on its side. The second truck braked hard, fighters jumping from the bed and scattering. Chun shifted targets to the dismounting fighters, dropping 2 before they reached cover. The remaining 10 fighters established firing positions, adding their weapons to the assault on the pinned SEAL team. Long shot havoc. Outstanding shooting. The grudging respect in Reeves' voice was unmistakable. Hold what you can. Air support, now, 32 mics out. Chin settled back into her scope, scanning for fresh targets. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, and sweat stung her eyes despite the morning chill at her elevation. In the valley below, the SEALs fought for their lives against an enemy that should have killed them 3 times already. She had fired 18 rounds in 4 minutes. The real fight was just beginning. Chen's scope tracked a fighter moving between buildings, his path taking him toward a flanking position on the SEAL team's exposed western side. The man carried an RPK light machine gun, the long magazine distinguishing it from the AK-47s the other fighters used. If he reached that position, his sustained fire would shred the SEAL's minimal cover. The range measured 1,963 meters. Chun led the target slightly, accounting for his movement and the crosswind that had picked up as the sun climbed higher. Her shot caught him mid-stride. He dropped the machine gun and collapsed face first into the dirt. Long shot havoc. Good kill on a flanker. Reeves paused between transmissions to direct his team's fire. We're consolidating casualties, but still pinned. What's our threat assessment from your position? Chun scanned methodically, counting muzzle flashes and identifying shooter positions through the dust and smoke that now hazed the valley floor. I count 14 active hostile positions. Most are maintaining cover after losing their exposed shooters. They're being more cautious now. That caution would not last long. Through her scope, Chin watched an enemy fighter gesturing to his companions, organizing them. A leader, trying to coordinate another assault. She ranged him at 2,112 meters, adjusted for the distance, and fired. The fighter crumpled, and his nearby companions scattered in confusion. Havoc, hostile leadership element eliminated. They're disorganized for the moment. Copy that. Keep them off balance. We're moving casualties to better cover. Chun watched the SEAL team execute the maneuver, 2 men dragging their wounded teammates, while others provided suppressive fire. Torres moved despite his shoulder wound, using his functional arm to help carry the unconscious SEAL from the courtyard. The team consolidated behind a thick section of the compound's outer wall, their defensive position significantly improved. But the enemy adapted. 3 fighters rushed from the eastern buildings in a coordinated sprint, their movement sudden and unexpected. Chun engaged the lead runner, dropping him at 1,840 meters. Her second shot missed, as the remaining 2 dove. Chen's scope tracked a fighter moving between buildings, his path taking him toward a flanking position on the SEAL team's exposed western side. The man carried an RPK light machine gun, the long magazine distinguishing it from the AK-47s the other fighters used. If he reached that position, his sustained fire would shred the SEAL's minimal cover. The range measured 1,963 meters. Chun led the target slightly, accounting for his movement and the crosswind that had picked up as the sun climbed higher. Her shot caught him mid-stride. He dropped the machine gun and collapsed face first into the dirt. Long shot havoc. Good kill on a flanker. Reeves paused between transmissions to direct his team's fire. We're consolidating casualties, but still pinned. What's our threat assessment from your position? Chun scanned methodically, counting muzzle flashes and identifying shooter positions through the dust and smoke that now hazed the valley floor. I count 14 active hostile positions. Most are maintaining cover after losing their exposed shooters. They're being more cautious now. That caution would not last long. Through her scope, Chin watched an enemy fighter gesturing to his companions, organizing them. A leader, trying to coordinate another assault. She ranged him at 2,112 meters, adjusted for the distance, and fired. The fighter crumpled, and his nearby companions scattered in confusion. Havoc, hostile leadership element eliminated. They're disorganized for the moment. Copy that. Keep them off balance. We're moving casualties to better cover. Chun watched the SEAL team execute the maneuver, 2 men dragging their wounded teammates, while others provided suppressive fire. Torres moved despite his shoulder wound, using his functional arm to help carry the unconscious seal from the courtyard. The team consolidated behind a thick section of the compound's outer wall. Their defensive position significantly improved. But the enemy adapted. 3 fighters rushed from the eastern buildings in a coordinated sprint, their movement sudden and unexpected. Chun engaged the lead runner, dropping him at 1,840 meters. Her second shot missed as the remaining 2 dove behind a rock outcropping. She fired a third time as one emerged to advance, and he fell with his momentum carrying him forward 3 more steps before he collapsed. The third fighter retreated back to the buildings, abandoning the assault. Chun shifted her scope to scan for new threats, her breathing steady despite the rapid engagement sequence. 24 rounds expended, 36 remaining. Movement caught her attention 600 meters behind the seal position. She adjusted her scope's focus and felt ice settle in her stomach. A mortar team, 3 men setting up a tube with practiced efficiency. The weapon's angle pointed directly at the compound. Once they had range, the SEALs would have nowhere to hide. Havoc long shot. Mortar team setting up at your 6 o'clock. Range 600 meters from your position. They'll have you dialed in within 2 minutes. Reeves' response came sharp. Can you engage from your position? Range is 2,400 meters. Extreme for precision work. But Chun had qualified on shots beyond 2,500 meters on 3 separate occasions. Wind conditions were acceptable. The morning heat hadn't created enough mirage effect to significantly distort her sight picture yet. Stand by. Engaging mortar team now. She ranged the nearest mortar crew member, a man kneeling beside the tube with rounds laid out in front of him. 2,387 meters. Chun made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and controlled her breathing to the point where her heartbeat barely moved the reticle. The shot broke clean. Through her scope, she saw the kneeling man jerk backward. His 2 companions froze, confused about where the shot originated. Chun worked her bolt and fired again, dropping the second man as he reached for his rifle. The third fighter grabbed the mortar tube and tried to drag it to cover. Chun's third shot caught him in the upper back, and he collapsed across the weapon. Havoc long shot. Mortar team neutralized. 3 confirmed kills. Outstanding shooting, long shot. The respect in Reeves' voice had grown with each impossible shot Chun delivered. You just saved our lives. Again, Chun scanned the battlefield for fresh threats. The enemy fire had diminished significantly, the remaining fighters keeping their heads down after watching their companions fall to an unseen shooter. She counted 9 muzzle flashes from various positions, down from the original 20-plus contacts. Her intervention had broken the ambush's coordination, giving the SEAL team breathing room they desperately needed. But the fight was far from over. Her radio crackled with a transmission from base. All stations, Whiskey TOC. Air support delayed additional 1-5 mics due to mechanical issues with lead aircraft. Revised ETA is 4-7 mics. Chun did the math. 47 minutes until helicopter gunships arrived. She checked her remaining ammunition. 33 rounds left in her basic load after the mortar team engagement. The enemy still outnumbered the SEAL team, and reinforcements could arrive at any moment. Through her scope, Chun saw Reeves directing his team medic to treat Tora's shoulder while another SEAL worked on the leg wound their teammate had taken. The man from the courtyard had regained consciousness and was being stabilized. 3 wounded, but all alive for now. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. 4 fighters had detached from the main enemy force, moving low and fast through terrain features on the valley's western edge. They weren't moving toward the SEAL team. They were moving perpendicular to the fighting, heading toward the base of the ridgeline. Toward her position, Chun tracked them through her scope, confirming her assessment. The fighters moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to scan the ridgeline with binoculars. One pointed directly at her approximate location. They had identified her as the threat, and they were coming to eliminate her. She calculated their route. The approach would take them through dead ground, where she couldn't see them for portions of the climb. Based on the terrain and their visible fitness level, they would reach her position in approximately 18 minutes. Havoc long shot. Be advised, I have 4 hostiles breaking from main element and moving toward my position. They've identified me as a threat. The radio stayed silent for 3 seconds. Copy long shot. Can you relocate? Chen looked around her position. Moving meant abandoning the carefully prepared hide, the perfect sight lines, and the elevation advantage that made her long-range shots possible. It meant leaving the SEAL team without overwatch during the relocation. And there was nowhere to go on the ridgeline that offered better tactical advantage. Negative Havoc. This is the only viable position for effective overwatch. If I move, I lose my ability to support you. Understood. How long until they reach you? Chen watched the 4 fighters disappear into dead ground at the ridgeline's base. Approximately 18 minutes. I'll engage them when they emerge into view. But I need to keep supporting your position simultaneously. Long shot. Prioritize your own defense when they get close. We'll manage here. Chen returned her scope to the valley floor, scanning for threats to the SEAL team. The remaining enemy fighters maintained their positions, content to keep the SEALs pinned rather than risk another assault. Smart tactics. They were waiting for something, probably more reinforcements. Her radio crackled again, this time with a transmission from the SEAL team's corpsman. Havoc, this is Havoc 2. Williams is critical. That leg wound hit his femoral artery. I've got it controlled for now, but he needs surgical intervention within the hour or he's not going to make it. Chen checker watch. 43 minutes until air support arrived. Even then, medical evacuation would take additional time. Williams was on a clock that might run out before help arrived. Through her scope, she saw movement in the rocks north of the SEAL position. 2 fighters advancing during the lull in fighting, trying to improve their angle of attack. Chen engaged them rapidly, 2 shots in 4 seconds. Both targets dropped, and the attempted maneuver collapsed. But she had divided attention now. Part of her awareness tracked the 4 climbers she couldn't see, counting down minutes until they emerged on a ridgeline. The rest focused on keeping the SEAL team alive against an enemy that still had numerical superiority and was growing smarter about exploiting cover. 15 minutes until the climbers reached her. 41 minutes until air support arrived. 33 rounds remaining in her ammunition supply. The sun climbed higher, heating the valley and creating the first shimmering waves of mirage that would make long-range shooting increasingly difficult. Sweat ran down Chen's back despite the altitude. Her shoulder ached from the M110's repeated recoil. In the valley below, Torres helped the medic work on Williams while Reeves and his 3 remaining able-bodied SEALs maintained defensive positions. They were still alive because of Chen's intervention, but the situation remained desperate, and she had just become a target herself. Chen settled deeper into her scope, watching both the valley floor and the ridgeline approach simultaneously. Her finger rested along the trigger guard, ready. 14 minutes until contact with the climbers. She would deal with them when they arrived. Until then, she had a SEAL team to protect. The sound reached Chun first, a low rumble that didn't belong to the sporadic gunfire echoing through the valley. She lifted her eye from the scope and scanned the southern approach road. 2 vehicles emerged from the heat shimmer, larger than the pickup trucks from earlier. Technical trucks she identified through her spotting scope. Each mounted a heavy machine gun in the bed, and both carried a full load of fighters. Havoc long shot. 2 technical vehicles approaching from south, heavy weapons mounted. I count 6 fighters per vehicle, 12 total additional hostiles. The radio crackled with Reeves coordinating his team's defensive adjustments. Copy long shot. Can you engage the vehicles before they reach effective range? Chen calculated rapidly. The technicals were 3,800 meters out and closing at approximately 40 kilometers per hour. In 2 minutes, they would be within range to use their heavy guns against the SEAL position. The .50 caliber weapons mounted in those truck beds would tear through the compound walls the SEALs shelter behind. Engaging now. Chen settled her reticle on the lead vehicle's windshield, leading the target to account for its speed and the extreme range. Her first shot struck low, kicking up dirt in front of the truck. She adjusted and fired again. The windshield exploded and the technicals swerved violently, leaving the road and tipping sideways as it hit a drainage ditch. Fighters spilled from the overturned vehicle, 6 men scrambling for cover. Chen shifted to the second technical, which had braked hard at seeing its companion crash. The driver attempted to reverse, but Chen put 2 rounds through the engine block. Steam erupted from the hood, and the truck lurched to a stop. The 12 fighters from both vehicles consolidated into a defensive position behind the disabled technicals, using them as cover while they assessed the situation. Chen counted heads through her scope. All 12 had survived, and now they had prepared positions 3,000 meters from the SEAL team. Havoc long shot. Vehicles disabled, but all hostiles survived and have established fighting positions. They're out of effective range for their small arms, but they'll advance soon. One of the SEAL team members fired a burst from his position. Havoc, this is Havoc 5. I'm down my last magazine. We're running low on ammunition across the board. Chen checked her own supply. 29 rounds remaining. The mathematics of the situation grew increasingly grim with each engagement. The enemy had numbers and resupply. The SEAL team had neither. She glanced at her watch. 11 minutes until the 4 climbers reached her position. 37 minutes until air support arrived. Movement in the valley drew her attention back to the scope. The original enemy force, emboldened by the arrival of reinforcements, was preparing another assault. She counted 8 fighters gathering in the eastern buildings, organizing for a coordinated push. Then her radio transmitted a sound she hadn't expected. Laughter. Havoc, this is Whiskey TOC. Be advised, Longshot 6 weapon serial number just registered 22 confirmed enemy kills in the battalion tracking system. That's more than most infantry companies get in a deployment. Whoever she is, she's keeping you alive. Reeves responded immediately, and Chen heard something new in his voice. A warmth that hadn't been there in the original briefing. Whiskey TOC, Longshot 6 is the reason we're not all dead right now. When we get back, I'm buying her first round. Chen allowed herself a brief smile despite the circumstances, then focused back on the gathering assault force. The 8 fighters in the eastern buildings made their move, rushing across open ground in 2 groups of 4. Chen engaged the first group, dropping 2 before they reached cover. The second group made it to a rock formation closer to the SEAL position. Havoc long shot. 6 hostiles now within 200 meters of your position, taking cover in the rocks to your east. The SEAL team shifted their fire to the new threat, their suppressed weapons spitting control bursts. One of the advancing fighters fell, then another. But the remaining 4 used the distraction to close within grenade range. Chen saw the movement a half-second before it happened. One fighter rose from cover with his arm cocked back, a grenade visible in his hand. She fired instinctively, the round catching him in the chest as he released. The grenade fell short, detonating harmlessly between the fighter's position and the SEAL team. Excellent shot, long shot. Reeves transmitted between directing his team's fire. Grenade threat neutralized. But the engagement had cost Chen 3 more rounds, and the remaining fighters pressed their advantage. They had learned from their casualties, moving in short bounds and using every scrap of cover. Chen worked her rifle rapidly, engaging targets as they exposed themselves, but the enemy's tactical discipline had improved dramatically. Torres, despite his wounded shoulder, fired his rifle one-handed from the compound wall. The medic worked on Williams while trying to stay low enough to avoid the incoming fire. Chen watched through her scope as Reeves directed his diminishing team with hand signals, conserving their ammunition by choosing shots carefully. The 4 fighters in the rocks launched a volley of grenades. 2 fell short, their explosions showering the SEAL position with rock fragments. 1 sailed over the wall harmlessly. The 4th landed directly in the compound courtyard. Grenade! The shout came over the radio, followed by the crump of the explosion. Chen's heart stopped until she heard Reeves call for a status check. All team members responded, shaken but functional. Chen shifted her attention briefly to check on the climbers. She couldn't see them yet, but the timeline in her head counted down relentlessly. 8 minutes until they reached visual range. Her position would become untenable once they engaged her at close quarters. Back in the valley, the reinforcements from the disabled technicals had advanced to within 2,000 meters of the SEAL position. They moved cautiously, having watched their companions fall to Chen's long-range fire. But they moved nonetheless, adding their weapons to the assault. Havoc long shot. Reinforcement element advancing on your position. They'll be in effective range in approximately 5 minutes. Copy. We're preparing to displace if we can. Williams is stable enough to move, but it won't be pretty. Chun scanned the valley for alternate positions the SEAL team could retreat to. Every option involved crossing open ground under fire. The enemy had them effectively trapped unless air support arrived or the situation changed dramatically. Through her scope, she watched the original assault force coordinating with the reinforcements. 20 enemy fighters now pressed the attack from multiple directions. Chun engaged the most immediate threats, dropping a fighter who attempted to rush the SEAL position, then shifting to eliminate a man with an RPG before he could fire. 23 rounds remaining. 6 minutes until climbers reached her. 33 minutes until air support. Her radio crackled with Torres' voice, strained with pain and exhaustion. Havoc, this is Havoc 3. I see movement on Longshot's ridgeline. Multiple contacts climbing toward her position. Chun keyed her radio. Affirm, Havoc. 4 hostiles en route to my position, approximately 6 minutes out. Reeves responded immediately. Longshot, can you relocate? Negative. No better position available, and relocation leaves you without overwatch during enemy assault. Longshot, when they reach you, you defend yourself. That's an order. We'll manage. Chun returned to her scope, engaging 2 more fighters who attempted to flank the SEAL position from the north. Both fell to precise headshots at 1,900 meters. 21 rounds remaining. The mathematics refused to balance. Too many enemies, too little ammunition, too many threats converging simultaneously. Williams needed immediate medical evacuation. Torres fought with one arm. The climbers approached her position with lethal intent. The reinforced enemy force pressed their numerical advantage. But Chun had been in impossible situations before. She had fired expert qualification scores with instructors who told her women couldn't shoot. She had earned her precision marksman designation despite a commanding officer who refused to nominate her. She had deployed 4 times to prove herself over and over again. She would not stop proving it now. Through her scope, she identified the enemy commander, the man directing the assault with hand signals from a protected position. He thought himself safe at 2,200 meters behind substantial cover. Chun waited for him to expose himself during his next set of commands. When he rose to signal his fighters, she fired. The round traveled 2.6 seconds before striking him in the upper chest. He dropped, and his nearby fighters scattered in confusion. Havoc long shot. Enemy leadership eliminated. They're disorganized again. You're giving us a chance. Long shot. Keep it up. Chun settled back into her scope, dividing her attention between the valley floor and the ridgeline where 4 determined fighters climbed toward her position. 5 minutes until contact. 20 rounds remaining. 31 minutes until air support. The sun continued its climb, heating the valley floor and creating mirage effects that made her long-range shots increasingly difficult. Sweat soaked through her uniform despite the altitude. The M110's barrel grew hot from sustained fire. In the valley below, the SEAL team held their position through discipline and Chen's overwatch. But everyone knew the situation couldn't last. Something had to break. The question was whether it would break in their favor or against them. Chun chambered a fresh round and returned her eye to the scope. For minutes until the climbers reached her. She would deal with them when they arrived. Until then, she had 12 American lives, depending on her ability to keep shooting, keep hitting, and keep an entire enemy force at bay from 2,000 meters away. The rifle felt solid in her hands. 20 rounds was enough. It had to be enough. Chun performed the calculation with brutal clarity. 20 rounds remaining. 15 for supporting the SEAL team through the next critical phase. 5 reserved for defending herself when the climbers arrived. The mathematics allowed no margin for error no missed shots, no wasted ammunition on targets that didn't pose immediate lethal threats. Through her scope, she watched 3 enemy fighters coordinate their movement in a valley below, preparing to rush the SEAL position from different angles simultaneously. Chen ranged each target, prioritized by threat level, and fired 3 times in 8 seconds. All 3 dropped before completing their assault. 17 rounds remaining. Havoc long shot. 3 hostiles neutralized on your Easter approach. Copy long shot. We're taking fire from the north now, multiple contacts. Chun shifted her scope 40 degrees and found the northern threat. For fighters using a wadi for concealment, advancing in bounds toward the SEAL team's flank. She engaged the lead man as he crossed open ground. 16 rounds. The others dove for cover, their advance stalled. Movement on the ridgeline caught her peripheral vision. The climbers had reached a point where she could see them through gaps in the terrain. 3 minutes away now, moving with tactical discipline. She noted their weapons, AK-47S, chest rigs full of magazines, 1 man carrying what looked like a PK machine gun. They came prepared to eliminate her position with overwhelming firepower. Chen returned to the valley. The corpsman's voice came over the radio, tight with stress. Havoc actual, Williams is deteriorating. I've got the bleeding controlled, but his blood pressure is dropping. He needs a surgeon soon. Reeves responded with force calm. Whisky tok, Havoc actual. Request immediate medevac for critical casualty. Can we get a bird in here before the full air package arrives? Negative Havoc. Weather is still below minimums for medevac flight. All assets inbound together in 29 minutes. 29 minutes. Chun checked Williams through her scope. The corpsman had him stabilized, but the man's face showed a pallor that spoke of significant blood loss. 29 minutes might be too long. The enemy in the valley recognized the SEAL team's vulnerable position and pressed their advantage. 8 fighters advanced from multiple directions, using coordinated fire and movement. Chun engaged the closest threats, dropping 2 men who attempted to close within grenade range. 14 rounds remaining, but she couldn't cover every approach simultaneously. 3 fighters reached a position 30 meters from the SEAL team's western flank, close enough to be dangerous even with the defensive advantage Reeves' men held. The SEALs shifted fire to the new threat, their suppressed weapons hammering the position. Then Chen heard it. Boots on rock, close enough that sound carried to her position. The climbers had reached a ridgeline. Somewhere below her hide in terrain she couldn't observe without exposing herself. She estimated their position at 40 meters downslope, perhaps less. Havoc long shot. Climbers are at my position. I'm going weapons hot on close defense. Copy long shot. Do what you need to do. We got things here for the moment. Chen knew that was optimistic at best. Through her scope, she counted 15 enemy fighters still active in the valley, with the SEAL team down to critical ammunition levels. But Reeves was giving her permission to prioritize her own survival, and she would take it. She drew her M9 Beretta, checking the chamber and magazine. 15 rounds plus 1 chambered. The pistol felt inadequate compared to the rifle, but at close range it would have to suffice. Her combat knife sat secure in its sheath on her vest. If the climbers reached her position, the fight would be measured in meters and seconds rather than kilometers and minutes. A head appeared 30 meters downslope, visible for 2 seconds before dropping back behind cover. Chun tracked the position but held fire. At this range with a pistol against a partially exposed target, she would likely miss and reveal her exact location. Better to wait for a clear shot. The radio crackled. Havoc, this is Havoc 5. I'm Winchester on ammunition. Switching to pistol. Chen's tactical awareness fragmented between immediate threats. 1 SEAL completely out of rifle ammunition. Climbers within striking distance of her position. Williams dying slowly from blood loss. Enemy fighters pressing multiple coordinated assaults in the valley. 27 minutes until air support arrived. She made her choice. The SEAL team faced the larger immediate threat, and she still had 14 rifle rounds. Chen returned to her scope, scanning for the highest priority targets in the valley. She found them immediately, Two fighters with RPGs moving into position to engage the compound from a protected angle. Chun fired twice in rapid succession, extreme range shots at 2,300 meters through increasing heat mirage. The first RPG gunner fell. The second managed to fire before her bullet struck him. The rocket streaked across the valley, impacting the compound wall 3 meters from where Torres crouched. The explosion showered the area with debris, and Chin's heart stopped until she heard Torres cough and curse over the radio. 12 rounds remaining in the M110. 2 more climbers to account for on her ridgeline. 26 minutes until rescue. Movement to her left. Chun pivoted with her pistol raised and fired 3 times at a figure emerging from behind a rock outcropping 25 meters away. The first 2 shots missed. The third caught the climber in the shoulder and spun him back into cover. Not a killing shot, but it bought her seconds. Automatic fire ripped through her position from a different angle. The PKM gunner had found her, his machine gun chewing apart the rocks that provided her concealment. Chun rolled right as bullets impacted where she had been, feeling shrapnel from pulverized stone slice across her upper arm. She came up firing, emptying her pistol's magazine at the muzzle flash 40 meters away. The PKM fell silent. Her arm burned where the stone fragments had cut through her uniform. Blood soaked her sleeve, but the wound felt superficial, painful but not debilitating. She dropped the empty magazine from her pistol and reloaded with her spare, chambering around. 15 shots remaining in the handgun. The radio exploded with urgent transmissions. Multiple hostiles rushing our position. Havoc 5 engaged in close combat hand-to-hand. Chun grabbed her rifle and returned to the scope, ignoring the climbers momentarily. Through the optics, she saw chaos in the valley. 5 enemy fighters had breached the SEAL team's perimeter, engaging in close-quarters combat. One grappled with a SEAL near the compound entrance. Another raised his rifle toward Torres' back. Chun fired without conscious thought, pure training taking over. The fighter threatening Torres dropped. She shifted and fired again, hitting the man fighting hand-to-hand with the SEAL. Her third shot took down a fighter rushing toward Williams and the corpsman. 9 rounds left in the rifle, but she had exposed her position with the rapid fire. A volley of incoming rounds from the valley forced her to drop below the ridgeline crest. When she raised her head again, 3 enemy fighters had used the distraction to close within 100 meters of the SEAL position. Long shot, Havoc. Break contact and defend your position. That's an order. We can handle this. She knew it was a lie. The SEAL team couldn't handle it. Not with 1 man out of ammunition, 3 wounded, and an enemy force that still held numerical superiority. But Reeves was trying to give her permission to survive. Behind her, she heard careful movement. The climbers regrouping, preparing their final assault on her position. They knew she was isolated, knew they had her outnumbered, knew she had limited ammunition for close-range fighting. Chun faced an impossible choice: continue supporting the SEAL team and risk being killed from behind by the climbers, or defend herself and watch the men in the valley die without her overwatch. She checked her watch. 24 minutes until air support. An eternity in combat time. Through her scope, she saw Williams convulse once, then go still. The corpsman worked frantically, performing CPR compressions. Torres fired his rifle one-handed at approaching enemies while trying to drag Williams deeper into cover. Reeves fought hand-to-hand with a fighter who had breached their perimeter. Behind Chun, boots scraped on rock. Close now. Very close. She made her decision the way she made every decision that mattered, based on who needed her most. Chun rolled onto her back, pistol raised, and fired twice at the figure appearing over the ridgeline edge. The climber fell backward with a scream. 1 down. At least 1 more still coming. Then she rolled back to her rifle, found her scope picture, and engaged a fighter who had Torres in his sights. The man dropped at 1,900 meters. 8 rounds left. Chun would protect the SEAL team until her ammunition ran out or the climbers killed her. There was no other acceptable choice. She had spent her entire career proving she belonged in this fight. She would prove it 1 more time, even if it cost her everything. The battle compressed around her, from both directions. Below, the SEAL team fought for survival against overwhelming numbers. Behind, the remaining climbers closed in for the kill. And Shin sat between both threats with 8 rifle rounds, 13 pistol rounds, and 22 minutes until anyone could help her. She settled back in her scope, found another target, and fired. 7 rounds left. The climbers could wait. The men in the valley could not. The sound came from directly behind her position, leather scraping against stone with the deliberate care of someone trying to move silently. Chun rolled left as automatic fire ripped through the space where she had been lying, the AK rounds impacting rock and sending fragments spraying across her hide. She came up firing her pistol, 3 quick shots that forced the climber back into cover. 11 rounds left in the M9, 7 in the rifle. 21 minutes until air support. Her radio crackled with the corpsman's voice, raw with desperation. "He's back. Williams is back. But I need to get him to a hospital now, or we're going to lose him again." Chun returned to her rifle, scanning the valley through her scope. The enemy had recognized the SEAL team's critical state and launched another coordinated assault. 6 fighters advancing from the east, 3 more from the north. She engaged the eastern group first, dropping the lead man. The others scattered, but continued their advance using better cover. 6 rounds left. Movement to her right. Chun spun with her pistol as a climber appeared 15 meters away, his AK rising toward her. She fired twice. The first round missed. The second caught him in the chest, and he went down hard. 9 rounds left in the pistol, but the engagement cost her precious seconds. When she returned to her scope, 3 enemy fighters had closed to within 50 meters of the SEAL position. Too close. At that range, they could throw grenades with accuracy, and the compound walls wouldn't protect the team from the blast effects. Chun fired 3 times in rapid succession, working her bolts smoothly between shots. All 3 targets fell. 3 rounds remaining in her rifle. Long shot havoc. Outstanding shooting, but we can't hold much longer. We're down to hand grenades and pistols across half the team. Behind Chun, she heard voices speaking in Pashto. At least 2 climbers left, coordinating their final assault on her position. They had watched 2 of their companions fall and learned caution. Now, they were planning how to eliminate her without exposing themselves to her fire. She ejected the nearly empty magazine from her M110 and loaded her final full magazine. 20 rounds. But these were her last. After this, she would be down to her pistol for any range beyond hand-to-hand combat. The voices behind her grew closer. Chun made a decision born of desperation and tactical necessity. She grabbed one of her smoke grenades, pulled the pin, and lobbed it downslope toward where the voices originated. The canister bounced twice and began spewing thick gray smoke. The effect was immediate. Confused shouting in Pashto, followed by a burst of automatic fire directed at nothing. The climbers had lost visual contact and panicked. Chun used the moment to engage targets in the valley, firing 4 times at enemy fighters attempting to exploit the SEAL team's depleted ammunition. All 4 targets fell. 16 rounds left. But smoke was a temporary solution. The climbers would adapt, either waiting for it to clear or using it as concealment to close on her position. And she had just used one of her 2 smoke grenades. The radio transmitted Torres' strained voice. "Havoc Actual, I've got eyes on more vehicles approaching from the west. Looks like 3 more technicals with mounted weapons." Chun swung her scope west and felt her stomach drop. 3 trucks racing toward the valley, each carrying additional fighters and heavy weapons. The enemy was committing everything to finish the surrounded SEAL team before air support arrived. She ranged the lead vehicle, 3,200 meters and closing fast. At extreme range, hitting a moving vehicle was more luck than skill, but she had to try. Chun led the target generously, accounting for speed and distance, then fired. The round struck low, kicking up dust in front of the truck. She adjusted and fired again. The windshield shattered and the technical veered off course, but kept moving. 14 rounds left. 2 more technicals still approaching. 19 minutes until air support. The smoke behind her began to dissipate in the wind. Chun heard careful movement through the thinning cover, the climbers advancing through the concealment she had inadvertently provided them. She dropped prone and low-crawled 5 meters to her right, abandoning her primary firing position for a secondary hide she had prepared earlier. A burst of automatic fire shredded her original position, the climber firing at where she had been. Chen came up behind a different rock outcropping and fired her pistol twice at the muzzle flash. One of the rounds connected. She heard a grunt of pain, and the firing stopped. 7 rounds left in the pistol. But the second climber used the distraction to advance. Chen saw him too late, the man appearing over a rock ledge 8 meters away with his rifle already aimed. She dove left as he fired, feeling rounds crack past her head. She rolled and came up firing her pistol, emptying 4 rounds at center mass. The climber staggered backward and fell from the ledge. 3 rounds remaining in her pistol. Chen's hands shook as she reloaded her last spare magazine. 15 shots. That was all she had left for close defense. The valley situation deteriorated further. The 2 remaining technicals reached effective range, and their mounted machine guns opened fire on the SEAL position. Heavy .50 caliber rounds chewed through the compound walls, forcing the team to abandon their defensive positions and retreat deeper into the structure. Chun engaged the nearest technical through her scope, firing rapidly at the gunner manning the mounted weapon. She hit him on her 3rd shot, and he slumped over the gun. 11 rifle rounds remaining. But the second technical continued firing, its sustained bursts keeping the SEALs pinned. She shifted her aim to the second gunner, ranged at 2,800 meters through increasing heat distortion. Her first shot missed high. She corrected and fired again. The gunner fell. 9 rounds left. Long shot Havoc were falling back to the compound interior. Multiple casualties. Williams is critical again. We need that air support now. Chen, check her watch. 17 minutes. It might as well have been 17 hours. The SEAL team couldn't hold that long, not against the reinforced enemy force that now numbered over 20 active fighters pressing from multiple directions. Behind her, something moved in her peripheral vision. The wounded climber from earlier, the one she had shot in the shoulder, had circled around and emerged from an unexpected angle. He held a pistol in his functional hand, his face twisted with pain and determination. Chun and the climber fired simultaneously. She felt his round tug at her vest, stopped by her body armor. Her rounds caught him twice in the chest. He fell backward and lay still. But the exchange had emptied her magazine. Chen's hands moved automatically, reloading her pistol with a final magazine. 15 rounds. That was everything. No more spare ammunition, no more reserves. When these rounds were gone, she would be down to her knife. The compound in the valley erupted with explosions. The enemy was using RPGs now, launching them at the structure where the SEALs had retreated. Chen watched through her scope as walls collapsed and debris filled the air. She couldn't see the team through the smoke and dust, couldn't confirm if they were still alive. Havoc long shot, requesting status. The silence stretched for 3 seconds that felt eternal. Then Reeves' voice came through, barely audible over background noise. Still here, long shot. Barely. That last barrage collapsed part of the building. We're trapped in here with limited movement. Williams is unconscious again. Chen scanned for targets through the obscuring smoke. She found one, an enemy fighter directing others toward the collapsed section of compound. She fired. 8 rounds remaining in her rifle. The man fell, and his fighters scattered in confusion. But there were too many of them. For every enemy Chun eliminated, 2 more pressed forward. The mathematics had never balanced, and now they had reached the inevitable conclusion. The SEAL team was trapped in a partially collapsed building with a dying man, minimal ammunition, and an enemy force that sensed victory. Chen checked her watch. 15 minutes until air support. She returned to her scope and engaged another target. 7 rifle rounds left. The climbers were eliminated, but she had burned through her closed defense ammunition doing it. Now she was alone on a ridgeline with barely enough ammunition to make a difference. Through her scope, she watched the enemy organize for a final assault. They gathered in groups, coordinating their approach with hand signals. They knew the Americans were nearly finished. They knew help was minutes away, but not soon enough. They were preparing to overwhelm the position before the helicopters arrived. Chun chambered around and settled into her scope. 7 shots. She would make each one count. If the SEAL team died in that valley, it wouldn't be because she had stopped fighting. The enemy began their assault. Chun started shooting. 15 minutes had never seemed so long. The enemy assault came in waves, coordinated and relentless. Chun fired, worked her bolt, fired again. 2 fighters fell at the compound entrance. 5 rounds left. She shifted her aim to a group of 3 rushing from the east, dropped the lead man. 4 rounds. The other 2 dove for cover. Through her scope, she saw Torres appear briefly in a window, firing his pistol one-handed before disappearing back into the structure. The man was fighting with a ruined shoulder and refused to quit. Chun felt a fierce pride mixed with desperation. These men deserved to survive. They deserved the air support that was still 13 minutes away. A massive explosion rocked the compound. RPG impact, direct hit on the western wall. Dust and smoke billowed from the structure. Chen's radio stayed silent for 5 terrifying seconds. Havoc long shot. Status. The response came fragmented, broken by what sounded like coughing. Part of the roof came down. We've got 2 more wounded. Torres took shrapnel to his leg. Still mobile, but not for long. Chen engaged the RPG team, firing twice. The gunner fell. His loader grabbed the weapon and tried to retreat. Chen's 3rd shot caught him mid-stride. 1 round left in her rifle. She scanned desperately for the highest value target, knowing this single bullet had to count more than all the others combined. Her scope found him, an enemy commander organizing fighters for a final overwhelming push, positioning 12 men for a coordinated assault from 3 directions. He stood in what he thought was cover, partially protected by a wall at 2,100 meters. Chun calculated the shot. Extreme angle, heavy mirage, target partially concealed. The round would have to thread through a gap barely 18 inches wide to hit him. It was a shot she would normally refuse to take, too many variables, too low a probability of success. But it was her last rifle round, and killing that commander might buy the SEAL team precious additional minutes. Chun settled her breathing, let her heartbeat slow, and waited for the perfect moment. The commander leaned out to gesture orders. 2 inches more. 3 inches. Chun fired. The rifle bucked against her shoulder for the final time. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's impact, the commander jerking backward and falling. His fighters froze in confusion, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos as they lost their leadership. The M110 was empty. Chun set it aside and drew her pistol. 15 rounds against an enemy force that still numbered 18 or more. The mathematics were absurd, but she had stopped caring about mathematics. She descended from her primary position, moving laterally along the ridgeline to a lower outcropping that provided a different angle on the valley. The change in elevation reduced her effective range with the pistol, but gave her a clearer view of the compound's eastern approach where most enemy fighters had concentrated. 11 minutes until air support. Chun watched 3 fighters rush toward the compound's collapsed section. At this range, nearly 400 meters downslope, her pistol was almost useless. Almost, but not entirely. She fired 5 times at the nearest target, walking her rounds toward him. The 4th shot connected, and he stumbled. The 5th shot dropped him. 10 rounds left. The radio crackled. Long shot, Havoc. We can hear rotors. Is that ours or theirs? Chun froze and listened. Over the gunfire echoing through the valley, she heard it too. The distinctive sound of helicopters, multiple aircraft approaching from the north. She checked her watch. Air support wasn't due for 10 more minutes. These birds were early, or they were enemy reinforcements. She grabbed her spotting scope and scanned the northern horizon. 3 black dots growing larger against the sky. American Apaches, their distinctive profile unmistakable even at distance. Someone at base operations had pushed them to exceed safe flying speeds in the marginal weather conditions. Havoc long shot. Confirmed friendly air inbound. 3 Apaches approximately 8 minutes out. The effect on the enemy was immediate. Fighters who had been pressing their assault began withdrawing toward their vehicles and cover positions. They had experienced American attack helicopters before and knew what was coming. Some tried to organize a defense. Others simply ran. Chen used the confusion to engage targets of opportunity with her pistol. A fighter trying to reposition a machine gun. Another attempting to drag a wounded companion to cover. 8 rounds left in her pistol. Each shot carefully aimed despite the extreme range and the weapon's limitations. Below in the compound, the SEAL team's situation remained desperate. The partially collapsed building provided minimal protection. Multiple team members were wounded, and Williams had stopped responding to radio calls. But they had survived long enough. Help was minutes away instead of the eternity it had been. Torres' voice came over the radio, weak but defiant. "Long shot. Tell those Apache drivers we're in the northeast section of the compound. Everything else is hostile. Copy Havoc. Marking your position now." Chun pulled her last smoke grenade, judged the wind and distance, then threw it with all her strength downslope. The canister arced through the air and landed 30 meters from the compound, bouncing twice before erupting in bright orange smoke. The distinctive color marked friendly positions, visible from kilometers away. The Apaches arrived like avenging angels, their turbine screams drowning out the remaining gunfire. The lead aircraft made one pass over the valley, identifying targets with its sophisticated sensors. Then all 3 helicopters opened fire. The effect was devastating and immediate. 30mm chain guns ripped through enemy positions with precision that made Chen's marksmanship look crude by comparison. Hellfire missiles obliterated the remaining technical vehicles in massive fireballs. Hydra rockets turned concealed fighting positions into smoking craters. The enemy broke completely. Those who could run did, abandoning weapons and wounded in their desperation to escape the aerial onslaught. The Apaches pursued them methodically, eliminating threats with the cold efficiency of machines designed for exactly this purpose. Within 90 seconds, the battle was over. The valley floor lay silent except for the crackling of burning vehicles and the thunder of helicopter rotors. Chen watched through her spotting scope as the Apaches established an overwatch pattern, circling the compound while additional aircraft approached from the south. Medical evacuation Blackhawks, 2 of them, escorted by another Apache. They dropped fast into the valley, landing in a cleared area 50 meters from the compound. Combat medics rushed from the aircraft toward the structure where the SEAL team had held their desperate defense. Chen sat down heavily behind her rock outcropping, her legs suddenly unsteady. The adrenaline that had sustained her through nearly 2 hours of continuous combat drained away, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Her wounded arm throbbed where the stone fragments had sliced through her uniform. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's repeated recoil. Her hands trembled as she holstered her pistol. She keyed her radio one final time. "Havoc long shot. Medevac is on site. Get Williams loaded first, then your other wounded." The response came from Reeves, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. "Copy long shot. We're moving casualties now. And long shot, you saved every life down here today. Every single one." She didn't trust herself to respond. She watched through her scope as the SEAL team emerged from the compound, carrying their wounded toward the waiting helicopters. Torres limped badly but refused assistance, helping to carry Williams on a stretcher. The corpsman coordinated with the medevac medics, transferring his patients to better equipped hands. One of the Apache pilots transmitted on the tactical frequency. "Longshot 6, this is Warhawk 2-1. We're seeing approximately 38 enemy Kia in this valley, most showing precision rifle wounds. That your work?" Chen closed her eyes briefly before responding. "Affirmative, Warhawk. I had good positions and clear field of fire. Outstanding shooting, Captain. Your battalion commander is going to want to hear about this when we get back." The medevac helicopters lifted off with the wounded, their powerful rotors blasting dust across the valley floor. Additional Blackhawks landed to extract the remaining SEAL team members. Chun gathered her equipment, broke down her rifle, and began the descent from her ridgeline position. Her legs felt unsteady on the steep terrain. Twice she had to stop and steady herself against rocks. The adrenaline crash hit her in waves, alternating between trembling exhaustion and sharp clarity. She had fired 60 rounds from her rifle and 31 from her pistol. By her count, she had confirmed 38 enemy casualties, possibly more that she hadn't been able to verify. She had also disobeyed a direct order from the SEAL team leader, expended all her ammunition, engaged in close-quarters combat with multiple attackers, and held a ridgeline position alone against an entire enemy force while providing overwatch for 12 besieged Americans. The implications of those actions would come later. Recommendations, investigations, after-action reports, and whatever consequences followed from her decision to defy Reeves' initial order to maintain observation only. But those concerns felt distant and abstract compared to the immediate reality. 12 Americans were alive. That was the only thing that mattered. Chun reached the valley floor as the final extraction helicopters prepared to depart. She walked toward them, carrying her rifle case and pack, her wounded arms stiff and painful. Several SEALs saw her approaching and said something to Reeves. The team leader turned and watched her cover the final 100 meters. When she reached the helicopter, Reeves stepped forward. His uniform was torn and blood-stained. His face showed the strain of the battle, but his eyes were clear. He extended his hand. Chun took it, expecting a handshake. Instead, Reeves pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. When he released her, his voice carried clearly over the helicopter noise. "You're the reason we're all going home, Captain. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." The other SEALs nodded their agreement, their expressions showing the bond formed through shared survival. Torres raised his good hand in a salute despite his wounds. Even the corpsman, exhausted from treating casualties under fire, managed a grateful nod. Chun boarded the helicopter without speaking, not trusting her voice. As the aircraft lifted off, she looked down at the valley that had nearly become a graveyard for 12 American servicemen. The burning vehicles and scattered enemy casualties told the story of a battle that should have ended very differently. The helicopter turned north, carrying them home. Chun closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her. The hard conversations would come later. For now, they were alive, and that was enough. The medical tent at forward operating base, Whiskey, hummed with activity when Chun arrived. Corpsmen worked on Torres and the other wounded SEALs, while a surgeon stabilized Williams for transport to the combat support hospital. Chun sat on a treatment table while a medic cleaned the fragment wounds on her arm, the cuts deeper than she had realized during the firefight. "You're lucky, Captain. Another inch to the left, and these would have hit the artery." The medic applied antiseptic that burned like fire. "As it is, you'll have some impressive scars." Chun barely heard him. Her attention focused on the surgical bay where Williams lay surrounded by medical personnel. The man's face showed a deathly pallor despite the blood transfusions running into both arms. His vital signs displayed on monitors that beeped with concerning irregularity. Torres occupied the next bed over, his shoulder packed with gauze and his leg wound bandaged. He caught Chin's eye and nodded once, the gesture conveying more than words could. She returned the nod, then watched the medic finish wrapping her arm. Major Patterson entered the tent and approached her position. "Captain Chun, good to see you mobile. I need you in the operations center for a preliminary debrief in 30 minutes. Colonel Anderson is inbound from Bagram and wants to hear directly from you what happened out there." Chun glanced down at her torn, blood-stained uniform. "I should clean up first, sir." Patterson shook his head. "Come as you are, Captain. The colonel wants to see exactly what his people looked like when they came off that ridgeline." She reported to the operations center 28 minutes later, her arm freshly bandaged but still wearing her combat uniform. The tent held a dozen personnel, including Reeves and 2 of his team members who were uninjured enough to participate. Everyone turned when she entered. Captain Chun, front and center. Patterson gestured to a position near the map table where satellite imagery of the valley displayed on multiple screens. Chun moved to the indicated spot, her body aching from the extended prone shooting positions and the adrenaline crash. She stood at attention, uncertain what was coming. Reeves gave her an encouraging nod from across the tent. Colonel Anderson entered, his presence commanding immediate silence. The man carried himself with the authority of someone who had spent 30 years earning his rank through competence rather than politics. He studied Chun for a long moment before speaking. "Captain, I've been reading the initial reports from this morning's engagement. They make for interesting reading. Lieutenant Reeves reports that you engaged approximately 40 enemy combatants over a 2-hour period while providing overwatch for his team. Is that accurate?" Chun kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. 38 confirmed enemy casualties from my position, possibly more that I couldn't verify due to terrain and smoke obscurement. And you accomplished this while simultaneously defending your own position against a dedicated assault team sent specifically to eliminate you?" "Yes, sir. For enemy personnel reached my ridgeline position, I engaged them at close range with my sidearm." Anderson consulted a tablet. "Battalion S2 has conducted a preliminary assessment of enemy casualties in the valley. They count 42 bodies showing wounds consistent with precision rifle fire. Another 6 with pistol wounds near your ridgeline position. That's 48 enemy combatants eliminated by 1 Marine captain in approximately 120 minutes of sustained combat." Chun said nothing, unsure whether this was praise or the prelude to an investigation into her actions. The tent remained silent, everyone watching the exchange. Anderson continued, "I'm also informed that you initiated your engagement of enemy forces against Lieutenant Reeves' explicit order to maintain observation status only. Is that correct?" Chun met his eyes directly. "Yes, sir. The SEAL team was about to be overrun by an RPG team. I assessed that immediate action was necessary to prevent American casualties and made the decision to engage. So you disobeyed a direct order from the on-scene commander." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Chun felt her career balancing on her response. "Yes, sir, I did." Reeves stepped forward. "Sir, if I may address that point." Anderson nodded. "Go ahead, Lieutenant. I gave Captain Chun a stupid order based on assumptions that were proven wrong within 30 seconds. She saw the tactical situation more clearly than I did from my position. When she engaged that RPG team, she saved Staff Sergeant Torres' life and gave my team the breathing room we needed to reposition. Everything that happened after that point, every life saved in that valley, came from her willingness to act when I was too blind to see what needed to be done." Torres spoke up from where he leaned against the wall, his injured arm in a sling. "Sir, I watched through my scope from the valley floor. Captain Chun took shots I didn't think were possible and hit targets I couldn't even see clearly. She fired 60 rifle rounds, and I counted 58 hits. That's a 97% hit rate at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters under combat conditions." Anderson turned his attention to Torres. "Staff Sergeant, you're supposed to be in medical receiving treatment." "I got treatment, sir. Now I'm here making sure everyone understands what happened out there." Captain Chun didn't just provide overwatch. She fought a 2-front battle for 2 hours while keeping 12 Americans alive against an enemy force that should have killed us all. If anyone tries to write this up as anything less than extraordinary heroism, they'll have to go through me and every other man who was in that valley. Another SEAL, Petty Officer Kowalski, added his voice. "Sir, the captain burned through all her ammunition protecting us, then fought off attackers with her pistol and still never stopped covering our position. I've been in special operations for 8 years, and I've never seen shooting like that." Anderson listened to each statement, his expression unreadable. When the SEALs finished speaking, he consulted his tablet again. "Captain Chun, you expended 60 rounds of 7.62 NATO ammunition from your M110 rifle. Battalion recovery teams counted 58 enemy casualties attributable to precision rifle fire at your firing position. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Chun thought back through the engagement. "I fired 2 shots at the first technical vehicle that missed completely, sir. I was engaging a moving target at extreme range and misjudged the lead. Those are my only complete misses from the rifle. 2 misses out of 60 shots. Anderson looked up from his tablet. Both at a moving vehicle exceeding 3,000 meters range in poor visibility conditions. Lieutenant Reeves, in your professional opinion as a special operations team leader, how would you characterize Captain Chen's performance during this engagement? Reeves answered without hesitation. Sir, she performed the best combat marksmanship I have ever personally witnessed. She kept a numerically superior enemy force at bay through precision fire while wounded, low on ammunition, and under direct assault. She made tactical decisions that saved American lives when I failed to make those decisions myself. If there's a higher standard for courage under fire, I don't know what it is. Anderson nodded slowly, then turned back to Chun. Captain, you're aware that disobeying orders in combat carries serious consequences. Yes, sir, I am. You're also aware that your actions this morning saved 12 American lives that would otherwise have been lost. Chun hesitated. I acted to prevent American casualties, sir. That was my primary consideration. Your primary consideration was to do your job despite being ordered not to do it. Anderson's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. Captain Chun, I'm recommending you for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in armed conflict against enemy forces. Your actions today represent the finest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. The tent erupted in applause from the SEALs present. Torres grinned despite his obvious pain. Reeves nodded with satisfaction. Chun stood frozen, uncertain she had heard correctly. Anderson raised his hand for silence. However, we still have the matter of orders disobeyed. Lieutenant Reeves, I'm formally reprimanding you for issuing tactically unsound orders that endangered your team and for failing to properly utilize available support assets. You will undergo additional training in Joint Operations Command before leading another mission. Do you understand? Reeves stood straighter despite his exhaustion. Yes, sir. Understood and accepted. As for Captain Chun, you are formally commended for making the correct tactical decision under extreme pressure despite orders to the contrary. In this specific circumstance, your judgment was superior to the on-scene commanders, and your actions proved that decisively. However, I expect that in future operations you will make every reasonable effort to coordinate with team leaders before engaging. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. Chun felt the weight she had carried since the first trigger pull finally lift from her shoulders. Good. Now, both of you get to medical and have your wounds properly treated. I'll handle the paperwork. Dismissed. Chun and Reeves left the operations center together, walking slowly due to their various injuries. When they were out of earshot of the command staff, Reeves spoke quietly. I'm sorry, Captain, for the dismissive comments before the mission, for not listening to your warning about those eastern buildings, for ordering you to stand down when you saw the threat clearly. You were right and I was wrong, and I'm grateful you had the courage to act anyway. Chun considered her response carefully. You made the best decisions you could with the information available to you, Lieutenant. The situation developed faster than anyone anticipated. What matters is that your team survived. They survived because you refused to let them die. Reeves extended his hand. Torres and the others want to buy you drinks tonight if the corpsmen clear us. We owe you that much at minimum. Chun shook his hand. Rain check, Lieutenant. I suspect I'm going to sleep for about 12 hours once they finish treating this arm. Fair enough, but the offer stands. Permanently. You're honorary SEAL team now, whether you want to be or not. He walked toward the medical tent, favoring his left side where he had taken shrapnel. Chun watched him go, then turned toward her own quarters. The sun had climbed high, heating the base despite the early hour. It felt wrong somehow that the day could be so ordinary after what had happened in the valley. She passed other Marines going about their duties, none of them aware yet of the battle that had occurred. Tomorrow the story would spread through the base. Within a week, embellished versions would circulate through multiple commands. But for now, only those who had been there knew the truth. Chun reached her quarters and sat heavily on her bunk. Her hands still trembled slightly from adrenaline depletion. Her wounded arm throbbed despite the pain medication. Every muscle ached from the sustained firing positions. But 12 Americans were alive to see another day. That fact made everything worthwhile. She lay back on her bunk and closed her eyes, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her. Chin woke 12 hours later to darkness and the sound of voices outside her quarters. Her arm ached where the fragments had cut through muscle, and her shoulder protested when she sat up. The digital clock read 2,147 hours. She had slept through dinner and most of the evening. Someone knocked on her door. "Captain Chun? It's Staff Sergeant Torres." "Sorry to wake you, ma'am, but the lieutenant colonel wants to see you." Chun stood carefully, testing her injured arm's range of motion. It moved stiffly but functioned. "Give me 5 minutes, Staff Sergeant." She cleaned up quickly and changed into a fresh uniform, noting how the fabric pulled against her bandaged arm. When she emerged, Torres waited outside with another SEAL she recognized as Petty Officer Marsh. Both men looked tired but alert. "What's this about, Torres?" The staff sergeant's expression was difficult to read. "Not entirely sure, ma'am. Colonel Anderson called for you specifically. Said it was important." They walked through the base together, the night air cold after the day's heat. Other personnel moved about their duties, but she noticed several turn to watch her pass. Word had spread faster than she expected. The operations center held fewer people than that morning, but the atmosphere felt charged with tension. Colonel Anderson stood near the map table with Major Patterson and 2 officers Chun didn't recognize. One wore the insignia of a Navy commander, the other Army military intelligence. Anderson gestured Chun forward. "Captain, thank you for coming. I know you need rest, but something has developed that requires your immediate attention. These officers are Commander Hayes from JSOC and Major Brennan from Army Intelligence. They've been reviewing the after-action reports from this morning." Commander Hayes stepped forward, his weathered face showing the strain of decades in special operations. "Captain Chun, I've read Lieutenant Reeves' report and reviewed the tactical assessment of the engagement. I need to understand the timeline of events before the ambush. Specifically, your initial warning about the eastern buildings." Chin's military bearing automatically straightened despite her exhaustion. "Sir, at approximately 05:15 hours, I observed signs of recent occupation in structures that intelligence had marked as abandoned. Fresh tire tracks, clear doorways, movement in upper windows. I transmitted a warning to Lieutenant Reeves that the buildings showed possible hostile activity. And his response? He informed me that intelligence assessed those structures as abandoned and likely contained civilians. He ordered me to maintain radio discipline unless I had confirmed hostile contact." Hayes consulted a tablet. "Your observation proved accurate within 40 minutes when those same buildings became primary firing positions for the ambush force. This suggests either faulty intelligence or that someone provided the enemy with American operational details, including the route SEAL Team 7 would take into the valley." The implications of that statement settled over the tent like a physical weight. Major Brennan spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the flat effect of someone who spent his career analyzing threats. "Captain, did you notice any other indicators that the enemy might have known about the SEAL team's insertion?" Chin thought back through the pre-dawn observations. "The ambush positions were well prepared, sir. Multiple coordinated firing points with good fields of fire on the target compound and the most likely approach routes. The enemy had RPGs pre-positioned and established fallback points. It wasn't an opportunistic engagement. They were waiting for us." Brennan nodded as if this confirmed something he already suspected. "In the past 6 months, 3 joint operations in this region have encountered unexpected enemy resistance. 2 resulted in American casualties. This is the first where the enemy was decisively defeated despite their prepared positions. The only variable that changed was your presence providing overwatch from an elevated position they didn't anticipate." Hayes picked up the thread. "Captain, we believe someone in the local intelligence network is compromising American operations. Your actions yesterday inadvertently disrupted what might have been a catastrophic ambush because you operated outside the parameters the enemy expected. You saw things that didn't match the intelligence picture because you weren't constrained by what the intelligence told you to see." Chin processed this carefully. "Are you saying the intelligence brief was deliberately falsified, sir?" We're saying it's a possibility we have to investigate. Brennan pulled up imagery on the map table display. These satellite photos from 2 days before your mission show the eastern buildings as abandoned, matching the intelligence brief. But these images from yesterday morning, taken during the battle, show the same buildings being used as fighting positions with established fields of fire. The enemy didn't move into those positions overnight. They'd been there for days, possibly weeks. Anderson addressed Chin directly. Captain, you're being assigned to the investigation team. Your tactical observations from the Overwatch position give you insight no one else has. Commander Hayes needs someone who can identify what doesn't match the intelligence picture, because you've already proven you can do exactly that. Chun felt her exhaustion warring with duty. Sir, I'm a precision marksman, not an intelligence analyst. You're a Marine who saved 12 lives by trusting your eyes over a briefing packet. Hayes met her gaze levelly. That's exactly the perspective we need. Major Brennan will handle the technical analysis. Your job is to tell us what you saw that contradicted the intelligence assessment. Torres, who had been standing quietly near the entrance, spoke up. Sir, if I may, Captain Chin also needs to know that Lieutenant Reeves submitted his after-action report this evening. He documented his decision to disregard her initial warning and explicitly stated that his error nearly cost his entire team their lives. He's requested formal investigation into how the intelligence could have been so wrong. Hayes nodded. Lieutenant Reeves' candor is commendable and supports our concern that something systemic is wrong. Captain Chun, will you assist with this investigation? Chun thought about the 12 men who had survived because she trusted her observations over the official briefing. If that same faulty intelligence was putting other Americans at risk, she had an obligation to help stop it. Yes, sir, I will. Good. Report to Major Brennan at 0800 tomorrow. He'll brief you on what we know so far. Anderson looked at Torres and Marsh. Staff Sergeant, you and Petty Officer Marsh are also assigned to the investigation team. Your ground-level observations during the ambush will help us reconstruct how the enemy knew to position forces exactly where they could do maximum damage. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes as Brennan outlined the scope of the investigation. 3 previous operations compromised. Patterns of enemy foreknowledge suggesting intelligence leaks. Questions about local interpreters and contractors with access to operational planning. The complexity made Chin's head spin. When the meeting concluded, she walked back toward her quarters with Torres and Marsh. The petty officer spoke first, his voice low. Ma'am, there's something else you should know. The SEALs are talking about how you were proven right and how Reeves initially dismissed your warning. Some of the senior enlisted are asking questions about whether that dismissal had anything to do with you being a female Marine attached to a SEAL operation. Chun felt her jaw tighten. That's not a productive line of discussion, petty officer. With respect, ma'am, it's a discussion that needs to happen. Torres adjusted his injured arm in its sling. I've been in special operations for 6 years. I've seen good intelligence officers, great support personnel, and exceptional shooters. You're all 3. But I've also seen talented women get their assessments questioned more often than equally talented men. If that happened to you yesterday morning, it's part of why we ended up in that situation. Marsh added his agreement. The lieutenant admitted he was wrong, and that took guts. But we need to understand if his initial reaction came from tactical assessment or unconscious bias. Because if it's bias, that's something we can train away. If it's just bad luck and faulty intelligence, that's different. Chin appreciated their honesty, but worried about where this conversation led. Right now, we focus on the intelligence failure. That's the immediate threat to operations. Personal dynamics can be addressed later through proper channels. They reached her quarters, and the 2 SEALs prepared to leave. Torres turned back at the door. Ma'am, one more thing. Williams made it through surgery. He's stable, and they're flying him to Germany tomorrow. The docs say he'll make a full recovery. The relief that washed through Chan was almost physical. That's excellent news, Staff Sergeant. He wanted me to tell you specifically. Said when he was going under for surgery, the last thing he remembers is hearing your rifle fire and knowing someone was watching over us. He wants to thank you personally when he's recovered. After they left, Chin sat on her bunk and considered the day's revelations. A morning firefight that saved 12 lives. A preliminary commendation for extraordinary heroism. Assignment to an intelligence investigation. Questions about whether gender bias had influenced critical tactical decisions. And William's alive when he should have been dead. The knock on her door came 20 minutes later. She opened it to find Reeves standing outside, looking as exhausted as she felt. "Captain, I know it's late. This won't take long." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Torres told me what Marsh said about unconscious bias. I've been thinking about that. About my initial dismissal of your warning, my order to maintain observation only, my assumption that you couldn't effectively engage at extreme range. I kept telling myself it was tactical judgment, but I'm not certain that's entirely true." Chin invited him in, closing the door for privacy. "Lieutenant, you made decisions under pressure based on your training and experience." Reeves shook his head. "I made assumptions about your capabilities, about the validity of your tactical assessment, about whether a Marine captain attached to my operation could perform at the level the mission required. Some of those assumptions might have been influenced by the fact that you're a woman in a role that's been almost exclusively male. I don't know for certain, but I have to consider the possibility." The honesty in his admission struck Chun as rare and valuable. "What matters is that you're willing to examine those assumptions now. What matters is that you saved my team despite my failures." Reeves met her eyes directly. "I've submitted myself for review of my command decisions during that operation. Not as punishment, but because I need to understand if I endangered my team through bias I didn't recognize. If I did, I owe it to them and to every future operator I work with to identify and correct that." Chin respected his willingness to face uncomfortable questions about his own judgment. "That takes courage, Lieutenant. Less courage than standing on a ridgeline for 2 hours engaging an enemy force alone." Reeves moved toward the door. "Get some rest, Captain. Tomorrow we figure out who tried to get us all killed with bad intelligence." After he left, Chin lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. The day had started with a simple Overwatch mission. It had evolved into something far more complex, with implications that extended beyond a single firefight in a remote valley. But 12 Americans were alive. That remained the central truth around which everything else revolved. Whatever came next, she would face it the same way she had faced the battle, with clear eyes, steady hands, and the willingness to trust her own judgment even when others questioned it. Major Brennan's office occupied a corner of the intelligence section, walls covered with maps, marked with operational data and casualty reports. Chin reported at precisely 0800 hours, her arms still stiff but functional. Torres and Marsh arrived moments later, both looking alert despite their injuries. Brennan gestured them to seats around a conference table. "Thank you for coming. What I'm about to show you is classified at the secret level. Commander Hayes has authorized your access based on operational necessity." He activated a display screen showing satellite imagery of the valley. "This is the intel brief image provided to SEAL Team 748 hours before your mission. Note the eastern buildings marked as abandoned, the compound marked as occupied by 3 to 5 enemy personnel, and the assessment of minimal enemy presence in the operational area." The next image appeared, taken from Chin's helmet camera during the battle. "This is from your perspective during the engagement, Captain. Count the muzzle flashes." Chin studied the image. "I count 23 distinct firing positions, sir. The eastern buildings alone contain at least 9 active shooters." "Correct. Now look at this." Brennan pulled up a third image, satellite photography from 6 days before the operation. These buildings show thermal signatures consistent with habitation. Multiple heat sources, regular patterns of movement, vehicle traffic. Someone reviewed this imagery before your mission and assessed it as abandoned civilian structures. "That's not an intelligence failure," Torres observed. "That's deliberate misrepresentation." Brennan nodded grimly. "We believe so. Over the past 4 months, 6 operations in this region have received intelligence assessments that prove catastrophically inaccurate. The pattern suggests someone in the intelligence chain is either incompetent on a scale that defies probability or deliberately providing false assessments to compromise American operations. Marsh leaned forward. Do we know who prepared the brief for our mission? A contractor named David Sullivan, former Army intelligence, now working for a private security firm that provides analytical support to forward operating bases. He's been in theater for 18 months and has prepared intelligence packages for over 40 operations. Chun saw where this was leading. How many of those operations encountered unexpected resistance? Brennan pulled up a chart. Of the 40 operations Sullivan briefed, 9 encountered enemy forces significantly larger or better positioned than intelligence predicted. 3 resulted in American casualties. Your operation would have been the 4th if not for your intervention. That's a 23% failure rate. Torres shook his head. Random chance doesn't produce patterns that consistent. The major continued. Sullivan has access to satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and human intelligence reports. He synthesizes this information into operational briefs. He also has contact with local interpreters and contractors who move freely between the base and surrounding communities. So he could be passing information to the enemy about American operations. Marsh's voice carried anger barely held in check. How many Americans died because of his intelligence packages? 7 confirmed killed in action across 3 operations. Brennan's expression showed he felt the weight of those casualties personally. Another 23 wounded. Your SEAL team should have been casualties 8 through 19, plus Captain Chun as number 20. Chun studied the satellite images again, comparing the official brief to the reality she had observed through her scope. Sir, when I transmitted my warning about the eastern buildings, Lieutenant Reeves told me intelligence assessed them as abandoned. He trusted the brief over my real-time observation. That's a reasonable command decision if you believe your intelligence is accurate, which is exactly how Sullivan's compromised information becomes lethal. Brennan highlighted several sections of the imagery. Commanders make tactical decisions based on intelligence assessments. When those assessments are deliberately falsified, it puts operators in positions where they're tactically disadvantaged before the mission even begins. You survived because you trusted your eyes over the brief and because your position allowed you to see what the SEAL team couldn't. Torres spoke carefully. Sir, we need to address something uncomfortable. Captain Chun provided accurate real-time intelligence that contradicted the official brief. That warning was initially dismissed. I need to understand if that dismissal was purely tactical judgment or if other factors influenced the decision to ignore her assessment. Brennan met the staff sergeant's eyes. You're asking if gender bias played a role in the decision-making process. Yes, sir, I am. Because if female personnel providing accurate intelligence are having their assessments questioned more skeptically than male personnel, that's a tactical vulnerability the enemy can exploit. The Major considered this for several seconds. That's a fair question, and one that Commander Hayes has specifically directed me to examine. Lieutenant Reeves has been fully cooperative in reviewing his decision-making process. He's acknowledged that unconscious bias may have influenced his initial dismissal of Captain Chen's warning, though he can't determine that with certainty. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with respect, the immediate priority should be neutralizing Sullivan's access to operational information. Personal dynamics can be addressed through standard review processes. Actually, Captain, they're connected. Brennan pulled up personnel files. Sullivan has survived scrutiny this long partly because officers have been reluctant to question his assessments. He's former military. He has impressive credentials, and he presents his briefs with confidence. Multiple officers have noted discrepancies between his briefings and actual conditions, but those concerns were dismissed as operational friction rather than systematic problems. Because nobody wanted to accuse a contractor of incompetence or worse without overwhelming evidence. Marsh understood immediately, and by the time the evidence becomes overwhelming, Americans are dead. Precisely. Brennan highlighted sections of after-action reports. But Captain Chen's intervention created a unique situation. For the first time, we have an operation where Sullivan's brief was completely contradicted by events, but the American force survived intact with detailed documentation of the discrepancies. Your helmet camera footage, Captain, combined with Lieutenant Reeves' candid after-action report, provides the evidence we need to move forward. Torres straightened despite his injured shoulder. What do you need from us, sir? First, I need you to review Sullivan's intelligence briefings for the 6 operations that encountered unexpected resistance. Identify patterns, common elements, anything that suggests deliberate falsification. Second, I need Captain Chun to provide detailed analysis of what she observed that contradicted the brief. Third, Staff Sergeant Torres and Petty Officer Marsh, I need your ground-level perspective on how the enemy positions suggested foreknowledge of American tactics. They spent the next 4 hours reviewing classified materials. Chin documented 17 specific discrepancies between Sullivan's brief and her observations. Torres identified tactical positioning by enemy forces that suggested they knew SEAL Team standard operating procedures. Marsh noted that enemy reinforcements arrived with remarkable timing, as if they had been staged in anticipation of American operations. The pattern that emerged was damning. Sullivan had access to operational planning through his contractor status. He attended briefings, reviewed mission timelines, and knew which routes American forces would take. The intelligence assessments he provided consistently understated enemy strength in exactly the locations where American forces would be most vulnerable. At 1300 hours, Brennan called a break. You've given me what I need to brief Commander Hayes. The evidence supports moving forward with Sullivan's detention and interrogation. Chun felt the weight of what they had uncovered. Sir, how many future operations might he have compromised? If he's been passing information to the enemy for months, there could be planned ambushes waiting for operations that haven't launched yet. We're conducting a comprehensive review of all pending operations that Sullivan had access to. Brennan's expression was grim. Several missions have been canceled or redesigned pending investigation. Your observation about future threats is exactly why we're moving quickly on this. Torres asked the question they were all thinking. When will you take Sullivan into custody? Within the hour. Commander Hayes is coordinating with military police and counterintelligence. Sullivan will be detained, his access revoked, and his communications monitored. If he's part of a larger network, we'll identify his contacts. The meeting concluded with instructions for continued analysis. As Chun, Torres, and Marsh left the intelligence section, they passed the military police staging area. 2 Humvees sat ready, teams of MPs checking equipment. Sullivan's arrest was imminent. They walked in silence until they were clear of the operations area. Marsh spoke first. How many Americans would still be alive if someone had investigated Sullivan 6 months ago? Chin had no answer for that. The question would haunt everyone involved in the investigation. Torres' response was quiet but firm. How many Americans will survive future operations because we stop him now? That's what matters. We can't change the past, but we can protect the future. They reached the common area where off-duty personnel gathered. Several SEALs from Team 7 sat at tables, and Torres gestured Chun toward them. The team members made space, and for the next hour Chun sat among the men whose lives she had saved, listening to their stories and accepting their gratitude. Reeves appeared near the end, pulling up a chair beside Chun. Sullivan's being arrested as we speak. Word just came through from Commander Hayes. The lieutenant's voice carried satisfaction mixed with anger. How many operations did he compromise before ours? At least 9 confirmed. Chin saw no reason to soften the truth. Possibly more that haven't been fully analyzed yet. The table fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. Americans had died because of Sullivan's actions, and only chance combined with Chin's accurate observations had prevented their team from adding to that casualty count. One of the younger SEALs, a petty officer whose name Chun hadn't learned, spoke up. Ma'am, I know this might be out of line, but I have to say it. You provided accurate intelligence that contradicted the official brief. That warning was dismissed. I need to know that in future operations, if a female Marine or soldier or sailor tells me something doesn't match the intel picture, that assessment will get the same weight as if it came from a male operator. Chin appreciated his directness. That's a command culture question, not something I can answer for your leadership. Reeves addressed his team member. It's a fair question and one I'm asking myself. He looked at Chun. I've spent the last 24 hours reviewing my decisions. I can't definitively prove that gender bias influenced my initial response to Captain Chen's warning, but I can't rule it out either. What I can tell you is that moving forward, I will question my own assumptions when I find myself dismissing input from female personnel. That's the best I can offer. The honesty in his statement seemed to satisfy the team. Torres raised his water bottle in a toast. To Captain Shun, who saved our lives. And to making sure we learn the right lessons so we don't need saving next time. The table echoed the sentiment, and Shun accepted their gratitude with quiet appreciation. As the gathering broke up and she returned to her quarters, she reflected on the complexity of what had occurred. A compromised intelligence contractor whose betrayal had cost American lives. Her own accurate assessment, initially dismissed, but ultimately proven correct. Questions about whether bias had influenced critical decisions. And 12 men alive who would have died without her intervention. The investigation would continue. Sullivan's interrogation would reveal the extent of his network and the damage he had caused. Recommendations would be made about vetting contractors and validating intelligence assessments. Command culture discussions about unconscious bias would happen at multiple levels. But underneath all the analysis and after-action reviews, one truth remained constant. Chun had trusted her observations, acted on her judgment, and saved lives because she refused to let procedure override reality. That lesson mattered more than any formal commendation. Sullivan's arrest occurred at 1400 hours. Chen watched from a distance as military police escorted the contractor from his office in handcuffs, his face showing shock that rapidly transformed into resignation. Commander Hayes supervised the operation personally, ensuring every step followed proper procedure. The man's computers, documents, and communication devices were seized for analysis. By evening, preliminary interrogation results reached the investigation team. Sullivan had confessed to providing operational information to enemy forces through an intermediary, a local interpreter named Rashid, who moved freely between the base and surrounding villages. The confession detailed 18 months of betrayal, dozens of compromised operations, and payments totaling over $200,000. Brennan briefed Shun, Torres, and Marsh in the secure conference room. Sullivan claims he started passing information because he needed money to cover gambling debts. The enemy recognized his access and exploited it systematically. By the time he wanted to stop, they had enough evidence of his collaboration to threaten him with exposure. Torres' expression was cold. How many Americans died so he could pay off gambling debts? 7 killed in action that we can directly attribute to his intelligence failures. Brennan's voice carried controlled anger. 23 wounded. Your team would have increased those numbers significantly if Captain Shin hadn't intervened. What about Rashid? Marsh asked. Has he been located? Afghan National Police arrested him 3 hours ago at his residence in the village. He had American operational documents, communication equipment, and evidence of financial transfers. He's currently being interrogated by counterintelligence specialists. Chun studied the timeline displayed on the conference room screen. Sir, Sullivan had access to our mission brief 72 hours before insertion. That gave the enemy 3 days to position forces, establish firing points, and coordinate the ambush. They knew our approach route, our target, and our extraction plan. Correct. They didn't anticipate your overwatch position because you were assigned to the mission at the last minute due to another sniper's medical issue. That assignment happened 24 hours before insertion, after Sullivan had already passed the operational details to his contact. Your presence was the variable they didn't account for. Torres leaned back in his chair, processing the information. So the enemy planned for a standard SEAL team operation without elevated overwatch. When Captain Shun started eliminating their prepared positions from 2,000 meters out, it disrupted their entire tactical plan. That assessment matches our analysis. Brennan pulled up tactical diagrams. The enemy positioned forces to engage a ground-level threat, with flanking elements and fallback positions designed for horizontal combat. They had no effective counter to precision fire from an elevated position they hadn't identified. Captain Chin's intervention didn't just save your team, it completely invalidated the enemy's prepared ambush strategy. The implications settled over the room. Chin spoke carefully. "Sir, this means every operation Sullivan briefed needs to be reviewed for potential compromise. If he passed details on pending missions, the enemy might have ambushes prepared for operations that haven't launched yet. We've already begun that review." Hayes entered the conference room, his presence commanding immediate attention. 37 pending operations have been canceled, postponed, or completely redesigned. We're conducting a comprehensive security review of all contractor access to operational planning. The damage Sullivan caused extends beyond the casualties. He's compromised American tactical advantages across an entire operational theater. Chun, Torres, and Marsh stood as Hayes approached. At ease, the commander gestured them back to their seats. "I want to discuss the broader implications of what happened during your mission. Specifically, the decision-making process that led to Captain Chin's accurate intelligence assessment being initially dismissed." The room's atmosphere shifted uncomfortably. Reeves entered behind Hayes, his expression showing he knew what was coming. The lieutenant took a seat at the table, meeting Chin's eyes briefly before focusing on Hayes. "Lieutenant Reeves has been fully cooperative in reviewing the command decisions made during your operation." Hayes activated a recording device on the table. "This conversation is being documented for the formal investigation. Lieutenant, summarize your assessment of the decision-making timeline." Reeves spoke clearly and without defensive posturing. "Sir, at 05:15 hours, Captain Chun transmitted a warning that the eastern buildings showed signs of recent occupation, contradicting the intelligence brief. I dismissed that warning based on two factors. First, the intelligence assessment had marked those structures as abandoned. Second, I made a judgment that observational error from her position was more likely than systematic intelligence failure." Hayes nodded. "Continue." "In retrospect, that judgment was flawed. Captain Chun is a qualified precision marksman with extensive experience in observation and target identification. Her assessment should have carried significant weight, particularly since she had direct visual observation while I was relying on a briefing document. I failed to properly evaluate the credibility of her real-time intelligence against the static brief." "And why do you believe you made that error in judgment?" Reeves took a breath before answering. "Sir, I've examined my decision-making process extensively. I can identify several contributing factors. Overconfidence in the intelligence brief. Assumption that my special operations experience gave me superior tactical judgment. And possibly unconscious bias regarding a female Marine captain's capability to provide accurate tactical intelligence in a SEAL operation." Hayes' expression remained neutral. "You say possibly. Are you certain bias played a role?" "No, sir, I'm not certain. But I can't rule it out, and that concerns me. If I'm carrying unconscious biases that cause me to dismiss accurate intelligence based on the source rather than the content, that's a tactical vulnerability I need to address." Torres spoke up. "Sir, if I may, Lieutenant Reeves has been completely honest about his decision-making process. But we need to address this at a command culture level, not just individual accountability. I've been in special operations for 6 years. I've seen talented female personnel have their assessments questioned more frequently than equally qualified male personnel. If that pattern exists systematically, it represents a significant tactical weakness." Hayes turned his attention to Torres. "Staff Sergeant, are you stating that gender bias is affecting operational effectiveness in special operations?" "Sir, I'm stating that we need to examine whether bias influences how we evaluate intelligence from female support personnel. Captain Chin's assessment was proven correct within 40 minutes. If similar assessments from female personnel are being dismissed in other operations, we might be ignoring accurate intelligence that could save lives." Commander Hayes consulted notes on his tablet. "I've reviewed after-action reports from 60 special operations missions over the past year. In operations where female personnel provided real-time intelligence assessments that contradicted official briefings, those assessments were dismissed or deprioritized 78% of the time. In operations where male personnel provided similar contradictory assessments, they were dismissed only 32% of the time. The statistics struck the room like a physical blow. Chun had suspected patterns existed, but seeing them quantified was different. Hayes continued without emotion. This suggests systematic bias in how we evaluate intelligence based on source gender rather than content accuracy. That bias creates tactical vulnerabilities the enemy can exploit, as demonstrated by your mission. Marsh asked the obvious question, "Sir, what's being done to address this?" Multiple initiatives. First, all special operations personnel will undergo bias recognition training focused on intelligence evaluation. Second, we're implementing new protocols requiring documented justification when real-time intelligence from any source contradicts official briefings. Third, we're establishing independent review of operations where conflicting intelligence assessments occurred. Reeves nodded his understanding. "Sir, I accept whatever accountability follows from my command decisions. But I want to emphasize that Captain Chen's actions saved 12 lives despite my initial failure to properly evaluate her intelligence. Her courage and skill overcame my tactical error." Hayes closed his tablet. "Lieutenant, you're receiving a formal counseling letter regarding command decision-making and bias awareness. You'll also attend additional training before leading future operations. However, your candor in acknowledging these issues and your team's successful survival partially mitigates the severity of those failures." "Understood, sir." Reeves accepted the consequences without argument. "Captain Chun, you demonstrated exceptional tactical judgment, combat effectiveness, and the courage to act on accurate intelligence despite being ordered to stand down." Hayes' voice carried unmistakable respect. "You're being awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. The citation will specifically note your accurate intelligence assessment and your decision to engage enemy forces to prevent American casualties." Chun felt the weight of recognition she had never expected. "Thank you, sir. The formal investigation will continue for several more weeks." Hayes stood, and everyone else followed. "We'll examine Sullivan's full network, review all compromised operations, and implement security changes to prevent similar breaches. But the core lesson is already clear. Trust accurate intelligence regardless of its source, and examine our own biases when we find ourselves dismissing assessments based on who provides them rather than their content." After Hayes and Brennan departed, Chun remained with Reeves, Torres, and Marsh. The lieutenant spoke first, his voice quiet. "Captain, I owe you an apology beyond what I stated in that meeting. I let assumptions override good judgment, and it nearly cost my team everything. That's on me, and I'll carry that knowledge into every future operation." Chun met his gaze steadily. "What matters is learning from it, Lieutenant. Your willingness to examine your own decision-making takes more courage than most officers demonstrate." Torres added his perspective. "Sir, you made a mistake that could have been fatal, but you own it completely and you're taking steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. That's leadership. The real failure would be defending the mistake or blaming the intelligence without examining your own judgment." Marsh nodded agreement. Most officers would have buried this, found ways to deflect responsibility or minimize what happened. You did the opposite, and that matters. They talked for another 30 minutes, working through the tactical lessons and the personal implications. When Shin finally returned to her quarters, exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. The past 48 hours had compressed a career's worth of experiences into a continuous crisis. But 12 Americans were alive. An intelligence compromise had been exposed. Systemic biases were being addressed. And she had earned recognition for actions that proved her capabilities beyond any doubt. Chun lay on her bunk and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring more investigations, more questions, and more documentation. Tonight, she allowed herself to simply feel the satisfaction of knowing she had made the right decisions when it mattered most. 3 months later, Chun stood in dress blues on a parade ground at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. The ceremony crowd included Marine Corps leadership, SEAL Team 7 in their service uniforms, and her family, who had flown in from California. The autumn sun warmed the assembled formation as the commandant of the Marine Corps prepared to present her award. The investigation had concluded 6 weeks earlier. Sullivan received a 20-year sentence for espionage and conspiracy. Rashid and 3 other members of his network were in Afghan custody facing local prosecution. 17 operations had been identified as compromised, with Sullivan's intelligence failures directly contributing to 7 American deaths and 23 wounded. But today focused on recognition rather than investigation. The commandant read the citation, his voice carrying across the parade ground. Captain Olivia Chun distinguished herself by extraordinary heroism while serving as precision marksman overwatch for a joint special operations mission in hostile territory. When SEAL Team 7 encountered a prepared ambush by numerically superior enemy forces, Captain Chun engaged enemy combatants at extreme range despite orders to maintain observation status only. Over a period of 2 hours, Captain Chun eliminated 48 enemy combatants while simultaneously defending her own position against a dedicated assault team. Her actions under fire directly resulted in saving 12 American lives and disrupting enemy operations throughout the operational theater. The medal felt heavy in the commandant's hands as he placed it around Chun's neck. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, represented recognition that transcended service rivalry. A Marine receiving the Navy's highest combat award spoke to the joint nature of modern warfare and the bonds forged under fire. After the ceremony concluded, Chun stood in receiving line as attendees offered congratulations. Torres approached first, his shoulder fully healed, his handshake firm. "Ma'am, the whole team is here. We wanted to see this happen in person." The SEAL team formed up behind him, all 12 men who had survived the Valley ambush. Williams walked without assistance, his recovery complete despite the severity of his wounds. Reeves stood among them, his expression showing pride that seemed entirely genuine. Captain Chun, Reeves spoke formally for the crowd, but warmth colored his voice. "On behalf of SEAL Team 7, thank you for your service and your courage. We owe you our lives, and we won't forget it." The team members each shook her hand, brief exchanges that carried weight beyond their words. Marsh mentioned he had recommended changes to joint operations training. Kowalski said female support personnel were receiving different consideration in his unit's mission planning. Williams simply gripped her hand and nodded, emotion preventing speech. Chen's family approached next. Her father, a retired Army colonel, embraced her with pride evident in his eyes. "Your mother would have been so proud." He gestured to her younger sister. "Show her the article." Her sister pulled up a news piece on her phone. The Washington Post had run a feature story about the mission, focusing on intelligence failures and the systematic bias that had initially caused Chen's accurate assessment to be dismissed. The article had sparked conversations across the Department of Defense about how gender bias created tactical vulnerabilities. "It's making a difference, Liv." Her sister's voice carried excitement. 3 senators have called for hearings on intelligence evaluation protocols. The Army and Air Force are reviewing their own operations for similar patterns. You didn't just save those SEALs, you started a conversation that needed to happen. Commander Hayes appeared as her family stepped aside. "Captain, a word when you have a moment." They walked to a quieter area away from the crowd. Hayes carried a folder that suggested official business despite the ceremonial atmosphere. "I wanted to brief you on outcomes from the investigation before you hear through other channels." Chin appreciated the courtesy. "What's the status, sir?" Sullivan's interrogation revealed a network larger than we initially assessed. 23 operations across 3 years were compromised to some degree. We've implemented new security protocols for contractor access and created independent verification requirements for intelligence assessments. More significantly, we've established mandatory bias training for all personnel involved in operational planning. That's substantial change, sir. It needed to happen. Hayes met her eyes directly. Your mission forced us to confront issues we had been avoiding. The statistics were damning. Female personnel providing accurate intelligence were being dismissed at rates that created genuine tactical vulnerabilities. We've now got empirical evidence that bias costs lives, and we're taking concrete action to address it. Shin chose her words carefully. Sir, Lieutenant Reeves has taken significant accountability for his command decisions. I hope the corrective actions focus on systemic change rather than individual punishment. They do. Reeves completed his additional training and has returned to operational status. His team specifically requested him back as their leader, which speaks to his leadership qualities and his willingness to learn from mistakes. Hayes paused. We're also tracking outcomes. Operations where female personnel provide real-time intelligence are now being evaluated with the same weight as male personnel assessments. Early results show improved operational effectiveness. That's encouraging, sir. It's necessary. Hayes closed the folder. One more item. The Marine Corps is establishing a new training program for precision marksmanship at the advanced level. They've requested you as the lead instructor. It's a career-enhancing position and puts you in position to influence how we train the next generation of marksmen. Chun felt the significance of that opportunity. When would it start, sir? 60 days. Gives you time to complete your current deployment rotation and transfer stateside. The program will train both male and female Marines, emphasizing the technical skills and tactical judgment you demonstrated during your mission. I'm honored, sir. I accept. They returned to the ceremony area where informal conversations continued. Chen found herself surrounded by Marines asking technical questions about her shots, wanting to understand how she had achieved such precision under combat conditions. She answered patiently, explaining range estimation, wind reading, and the mental discipline required for extreme distance shooting. A young female Marine corporal approached hesitantly. Ma'am, I'm trying to qualify as a designated marksman, but my unit is skeptical about female shooters. After what you did after this ceremony, do you think things will change? Shun considered the question seriously. Change is happening, but it's gradual. What matters is your qualification scores, your consistency, and your ability to perform under pressure. Demonstrate competence repeatedly, and skepticism becomes respect. It's not fair that you have to prove yourself more than male Marines do, but that's the current reality. Your job is to be so good they can't dismiss your capabilities. The corporal nodded, determination visible in her expression. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. As the sun dropped lower, the formal ceremony gave way to an informal gathering at the officers' club. Chun sat with the SEAL team, trading stories and accepting their good-natured ribbing about Marine marksmanship versus SEAL shooting skills. The atmosphere felt comfortable in a way that combat forges between people who have survived impossible situations together. Torres raised his glass. To Captain Chun, who redefined what Overwatch means. 48 confirmed kills, 12 Americans saved, and a Navy Cross. Not a bad day's work for a Marine. The table echoed the toast, and Chun accepted it with humor that masked deeper emotion. The day had been professionally validating and personally meaningful, but it also represented a turning point she hadn't fully anticipated. Her actions in a remote Afghan valley had sparked institutional changes that would affect military operations for years to come. Reeves stood to leave, shaking hands around the table. Before he departed, he addressed Chun directly. Captain, I want you to know something. I've spent 3 months examining my command decisions from that mission. I still can't determine with certainty whether bias influenced my initial dismissal of your intelligence. But I've learned to recognize when I might be making assumptions based on unconscious prejudice rather than objective assessment. That awareness will make me a better officer, and it came from your willingness to trust your judgment, even when I questioned it. That's all any of us can do, Lieutenant. Recognize our blind spots and work to compensate for them. He nodded and departed with his team. As the gathering continued, Chin reflected on the path that had led from a ridgeline in Afghanistan to this moment of recognition. The shots she had taken, the lives she had saved, and the conversation she had sparked about bias and tactical effectiveness. Her sister found her near the end of the evening. So what happens now? You're famous, you've got a Navy Cross, and apparently you're going to train the next generation of Marine snipers. What's next for you? Chen smiled. I teach people to shoot straight and think clearly under pressure. I work to make sure the lessons from that valley aren't forgotten. And I keep proving that gender doesn't determine capability, performance does. Sounds like you've got it figured out. Not entirely, but I know this much. 12 Americans are alive because I trusted my observations and acted on them despite orders to the contrary. If I can teach others to trust their judgment and examine their biases, maybe fewer operations will end with American casualties that could have been prevented. Her father joined them, pride evident in his bearing. Your mother would tell you that medals are nice, but the real measure of a warrior is how many people they bring home alive. You brought 12 home that day, Liv. Everything else is secondary to that. Chen looked at the Navy Cross around her neck, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. The medal represented recognition for actions that should never have been necessary. In a perfect world, intelligence wouldn't be compromised, bias wouldn't influence tactical decisions, and accurate assessments wouldn't be dismissed based on their source. But the world wasn't perfect, and warriors made their stand with the realities they faced rather than the conditions they wished existed. Chun had made her stand on a ridgeline, firing 60 rounds that saved 12 lives and started conversations that would protect countless others. As the evening concluded and she prepared to leave, Torres approached one final time. Ma'am, one thing I need to say. Every person in that valley knows we're alive because you refuse to let us die. That creates a debt we can't ever fully repay. But we're going to spend the rest of our careers making sure other female service members get the respect and trust they deserve from the start, not after proving themselves under fire. That's the best repayment you could offer, Staff Sergeant. He saluted sharply, and she returned it. The gesture acknowledged not just rank, but the bond forged between warriors who had faced death together and emerged changed by the experience. Chen walked to her car as night settled over Camp Lejeune. The ceremony was complete, the recognition official, and the lessons documented. Tomorrow she would return to duty, continue her service, and begin preparing for her role as an instructor. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel satisfaction in knowing she had made the right decisions when they mattered most. 48 enemy combatants eliminated, 12 Americans saved, systemic changes initiated, and proof documented beyond any doubt that courage and capability knew no gender. The ridgeline in Afghanistan was 5,000 miles away, but its lessons would echo through her career and the careers of those she would train. Chun drove away from the ceremony, the Navy Cross resting against her chest, carrying forward the knowledge that she had earned her place among warriors through actions that spoke louder than any words or medals ever could.